Welcome to Ask a Construction Health and Safety Expert with Deb Moskal and Dave Dametto. I'm your host, Ken Rayner. This 5-part series is designed to give new Ontario businesses the essential health and safety information needed to keep workers healthy and safe and their business compliant. Each year, IHSA welcomes around 10,000 new construction firms through automatic membership when they register with WSIB. That membership gives you and your new construction business access to low or no-cost training, tools, and expert guidance. And this series is part of that support. Many of the questions we're going to cover have come directly from Ontario construction companies with less than 5 employees. Companies just like yours. Today, we're covering a critical first topic: occupational health and safety training. What's required, what's available, and how to apply it effectively in your workplace. Dave and Deb, I'm grateful you're here to leverage your more than 50 years of combined experience in Ontario construction health and safety to share with our viewers and help provide a clear picture of what training is required. So Deb, I want to start with you first.
Sure.
We had many options for this first topic in terms of what we wanted to discuss. However, we agreed that training was the most appropriate place to start. So why was training an appropriate place to start?
Yeah, you're right, Ken. There is a lot to consider when you're starting a new business, a small business. And we did, talk about quite a few options, and training was decided because it's really a foundational item for a health and safety program. So whether you're new and just starting out and starting to build that program, or you already have a program in place, training will be the basic foundation to that. And so it's a really critical component when we talk about ensuring health and safety of workers to make sure that they get home safely to their loved ones. So I think if you look at this at a very granular level, providing training to workers gives them the knowledge on how to conduct a task safely, and hopefully there also the ability to identify if there's a hazard present or maybe the work isn't quite going as planned, to identify that difference and then have the ability to have some communication and understand how to report that so we can make sure those items are corrected. Along the same line as that, when workers are trained, so hopefully they'll have that relationship with the employer and they can go and report those hazards. And then we look at the benefits of that as being potential cost reductions from injuries or incidents in the workplace. So we're creating that knowledge foundation in the scope of work. I think it also really helps us to promote a strong safety culture between the different workplace parties. So generally we talk about, the employer, the supervisor, and the worker, and having that discussion piece between the parties about the scope of work. I think it also, from an employer's perspective, really helps to build a strong foundation for legal compliance, because there is that side of it that we do need to take into account as well. And we'll get into it a little later, but there are training requirements in the province of Ontario that are mandatory. And so we need to make sure that we've met that criteria and provided that education, but also any other training required based on my role within the company, your role within the company, and that can be very different. The end goal here is really just making sure that workers get home safely to their loved ones in the same condition that they left that morning to start their shift. So really it goes back to, what we say at IHSA all the time, the work safe for life piece.
Perfect, great. Dave, certain topics or hazards in the Ontario construction industry have requirements for a competent person to perform the required duties. Ontario's Occupational Health and Safety Act, or also known as the Green Book, has a definition for a competent person. Dave, what does the Act state?
Yeah, Ken, there is a legal definition for the term competent person. So it talks about a competent person being qualified because of knowledge, training, and experience to organize the work and its performance. It talks about being familiar with the Act and the regulations that apply to the work, and has knowledge of any potential or actual danger in the health and safety of the work. And all three have to apply for that person to be considered competent. Like you said, under the Act, there's some specifications there. Duties of an employer when appointing a supervisor has to appoint a competent person. In our regulations, when it comes to fall protection system training, the person performing the training has to be a competent person, as well as multi-point works platforms, as well as instructing workers when it comes to operating equipment. That term competent person comes into play.
Excellent, and that's very important.
For sure.
IHSA provides a free downloadable document called the Training Requirement Chart, which provides direction on who must be trained, the training required, and the applicable health and safety legislation. So Deb and Dave, how about we review some of the applicable training that's required in the province of Ontario?
Well, one of the first things, we'll look at workers first. And the first thing that the worker and every worker in this province needs to have is the worker health and safety awareness in 4 steps. It's going to give the worker some information on their roles and responsibilities, their rights and duties, but also the responsibilities and the duties of the health and safety representative, joint health and safety committees, and the roles that the Ministry of Labour is going to play when they're coming to our workplaces. A little bit different for the supervisor. The supervisor has to have the health and safety awareness, but this one's in 5-step. A little more detailed, right? A little bit longer, but it's basic training. It's going to give information, again, on rights and duties of both the worker and the supervisor, roles of the health and safety rep, joint health and safety committee, but as well as the roles when it comes to the Ministry of Labour when they're coming onto our project as well. It's going to give information on recognizing, assessing, and controlling hazards, as well as evaluating those hazards. It's going to give information on occupational health and occupational illness, and in some of our other episodes we'll talk more about those things there as well. But IHSA offers something else to go along with that. You can take what we call the basics of supervising at IHSA. It's probably our most popular program. It's going to give the supervisor some tools to be able to perform their health and safety duties the way they're supposed to and the way they're laid out. A big portion of that is learning how to interpret the Occupational Health and Safety Act and our construction regulations, because one of the things that trips most supervisors up is that familiarity with the Act and the regs. It's the green book, but how do I read it? How do I get to where I need to get to? And it's going to be it's a huge part of that program. What I like to tell people is whether you take the health and safety awareness or a combination of the awareness and the basics of supervising, that doesn't make you competent. Just because you've got those cards doesn't make you competent. It's the actions that you take after you leave the training is going to determine your competency or not.
Yeah, and I think another one that would be important for us to discuss is workplace violence and harassment training. So it is a requirement. Here with this training, we're looking to set the rules of engagement in the workplace. So when you think of the workplace, this could be your project, your office, shop, your yard, really wherever workers are performing work. And set some rules of engagement for interaction within the company. So we're looking at interaction with, us as coworkers, sub-trades, the employer, the constructor, if there is a constructor, and what is acceptable behavior and what is not. And then if we are exposed to the hazard of workplace violence and harassment, what's the process that I should follow to make sure that's reported appropriately? Another one worth speaking about has to do with hazardous materials. And so you may know this as WHMIS training. And so anyone who works with or in proximity to a hazardous product is required to have the training. So if you think of yourself, what products do you use as an individual, but also consider your workers and what products do they use, but could they also be exposed to by virtue of working with another trade. So if I, as an example, are working with you, Ken, and I'm walking through an area where maybe you're spraying a product, well, I myself am not utilizing that product. However, by virtue of working with you and needing to access an area, could be exposed. So one of the things that we want to make sure that individuals are aware of is there's actually 2 requirements for WHMIS training. So one is the in-class, I'll call it generic WHMIS that everybody takes. And then the secondary component is the employer-specific requirement, where back at the workplace, the employer is required to train the workers in the products that they're going to be using. So again, two requirements to be met there. I will say our training at IHSA is fully up to date with current legislative requirements and is available via e-learning or in class.
Yeah, one of the other ones that we talk about, Ken, is first aid training. So first aid training falls under the Workplace Safety and Insurance Act, and it really deals with the number of workers that the employer has. So it starts off with 1 to 5 workers. The employer needs to ensure that the person trained in first aid has St. John's Ambulance emergency first aid or its equivalent. So St. John's, or if you go to the WSIB website, they'll have the firms out there that are they're able to train first aid, and they're qualified to do that. As well, when it comes to that 1 to 5 workers, what's in the first aid kit or the first aid box, the supplies that are going to be there will be determined by that number of workers, or they have to have so many of each. Once you get more than 5 workers, the training changes. It goes from St. John's Ambulance emergency first aid to St. John's Ambulance standard first aid. It's a 2-day course. So the emergency is 1 day, the standard is 2 day. What else changes is the number of supplies that are required in that first aid box, and it goes up from there. One of the other ones that we look at is confined space. Confined space requirements have a lot of requirements when it comes to training. Our confined spaces, it used to be in our construction regulations, but it went into its own regulation and the requirements for training. So I'll just tell you a few of them. So it speaks to every worker entering a confined space or performs work related shall give adequate training for that safe work practices and working in that confined space, or for performing related work, including training and recognizing of the hazards associated with the confined space. It speaks to the employer shall ensure that every worker who enters a confined space or performs related work receives adequate training to perform the work safely. Another one is recognizing the hazards within that confined space. So just like that supervisor, that competent person, familiar with the actual and potential dangers. So there's requirements for that. And when it comes to emergency response, there has to be training for the attendant, as well as the workers who are going to be part of that emergency response team.
Deb, what about, so Dave mentioned confined space. What about one of the other major aspects of some task-specific training like working at heights?
Yeah, so there are requirements for task-specific training, and Dave had mentioned one of them being confined space. Another one that's very common in construction is working at heights. We know that not only is the task common in construction, unfortunately, this is the #1 cause of traumatic fatalities that we see within the construction sector as we look at, WSIB data and ministry data. So for working at heights, you need to take the training if you work on a construction project, and the construction regulation does detail specific types of equipment you're using. So it speaks to travel restraint, fall restricting systems, fall arrest systems, safety belts. So you'll want to refer to the legislation for the full list. But also if you're exposed to a fall hazard, this training becomes a requirement. Now I will say the employer or the constructor can go above and beyond that and say, on this site, it's mandated that everybody has it, regardless of role. But there is a new standard out there to make everyone aware of. The Working at Heights training standard was updated and effective April 1st, 2024. It still has a 3-year expiry associated with it. And so if you're looking to take the training or provide training to your workers, you'll want to make sure that the training is provided by an association who's recognized by the Chief Prevention Officer in Ontario. So to do that, you'll need to go to the Ministry of Labour website. You can search the firm name and you'll be able to determine if they're an approved provider or not. IHSA is on the approved provider list.
Excellent. And when you look at all this training, the ones that you just mentioned, you start off to make sure that the worker has awareness in terms of the hazards in the workplace, familiar with the roles and responsibilities of different parties. You're asking the same of the supervisor. Then we're getting into workplace violence and harassment to ensure that they're setting setting those expectations up for, again, for all parties in terms of conduct and behavior in the workplace, what's appropriate, what's not, getting into the use of chemicals. So knowing that in almost every single workplace, there are going to be some subset of chemicals that are going to be used. Let's make sure that we can use them all safely. And then if there was an incident that was to occur, that we have someone trained in first aid to be able to apply that emergency first aid training until the first responders arrive. And then looking at things like for working at heights in confined space, to significant high hazard tasks that we really need to make sure people are properly trained before they take on those tasks. So terrific. Thank you for sharing all of that.
And I think what it shows, if I just can quickly,
Yeah.
is there's some foundational training that everybody needs to have as like the basic starting point. And then we start to look at role and scope of work and tailor training requirements to that worker's job and what they're going to be doing. And so this is where, and we'll talk about it in later episodes, but also the hazard assessment process comes into play. And there's a really nice link that happens there. Whereas if we can set the foundation strong on the training, it really helps to support the rest of the program.
Terrific. And as you just mentioned, this is a start. This is not the end all be all. We haven't just discussed an exhaustive list of, okay, I can check these off. I don't have to take any more
Right.
occupational health and safety training. That's not the case. And just a reminder, the training requirements chart from IHSA is a free downloadable resource at IHSA.ca. And it's a 22-page document. So there is a significant amount of training you have to look at based on the tasks that you do and your construction business does to ensure you've covered everything off. All right. So what we just discussed, I think we could say for the most part would be considered general training. Deb, let's go back to you because you talked about working at heights. Let's use that as an example. So, let me be a little facetious here. When a worker successfully completes the working at heights training from a ministry approved provider, Deb, is that all they need?
The quick answer is no.
No. Good.
That is not all they need. But I will say this is a very good question because as our consultants are interacting in the classroom with organizations and individuals, and when we're interacting on site, this is a very common question we get and one that we continue to review and are happy to continue to review. So the answer is no. There's actually 2 levels to working at heights training that are required. So when you come into, let's just say IHSA as an example, and it would be the same for approved providers, you get the ministry standard training. So from the Chief Prevention Officer, we have to follow a standard. And so we deliver that criteria as defined in the standard. It's general working at heights is what I'm going to call it. The secondary component comes into play when that worker goes back to their workplace, because there is an employer requirement that the employer provide training to the worker in the equipment that they're going to be using. So that whatever style of harness and lanyard they're going to be using, they require training in that, both oral and written, from a competent person in the workplace. They need to also be aware of site-specific training. So if you look at, where are they working? What's the rescue plan? We need to be trained in the rescue plan before we work at heights. It's going to be far too late to try to come up with a rescue plan and get everybody on the same page when there's been an individual who's fallen and is now suspended in a harness. So we want to make sure we have those plans ready to be executed in a very quick and orderly manner. The other thing to consider with working at heights and that you'll want to review with your workers is they'll need to be able to calculate fall distance to prevent them from bottoming out. And so what I'm referring to there is, if I'm working on a roof and I fall, how much clearance do I have before I hit something parked below me? Maybe it's equipment or maybe it's material that we're storing. So we want to make sure we have enough clearance in that fall so that I'm not impacting the ground or items that are below me. The other thing to consider that workers do need is training in the fall hazards associated with their work. So you'll want to do a thorough review with them with where they're working and what are those hazards. I will note that IHSA has a downloadable fall protection work plan from our internet site that can be used. You can download it. It's a plan that will help you cover off some of this information here to help you make sure that you're properly prepared for workers to work at height.
Excellent. And that makes a lot of sense. You're using a lanyard, you're using a particular harness when you go to that Chief Prevention Officer approved training provider. and then you go back to the work site and you realize you have something completely different. So there has to be site-specific training on the equipment or perhaps the task that you're doing that must come from the employer or a competent person, someone that's competent to be able to instruct you in that regard.
That's right. Yep, in that specific gear.
Okay, so let's get back to that term competent person, because we've thrown it around a few times today. I'm going to throw it around a couple more, Dave.
Yep.
So we've used the term and the phrase competent person to highlight what training, expertise, and knowledge is required to address certain hazards. Dave, what about the competency of the person delivering the training in Ontario? Why is this so important?
Well, like Deborah said, the standard itself speaks to what an instructor, the qualifications of the instructor giving that. The regulations actually speak to workers being given written and oral instructions by a competent person. And that's that supervisor in a lot of cases. So again, like you said before, being familiar with the equipment that they're using, being familiar on how to use that equipment, being familiar with the site, and the site conditions change within our construction project, where the fault clearance may change from one minute to the next, or 1 week from the next. So we want to make sure. So that equipment-specific training is so important. But like you said, when you come to IHSA, we're going to train you on a certain harness, certain lanyard, certain rope grab. You're going to go to your site and you're going to use something completely different. We want to make sure that that person giving that training is competent and they know how to use that equipment. And that's where that definition of a competent person, knowledge, training, experience to organize the work and its performance.
Well, I can appreciate that. If I'm getting training from someone and I'm going to complete some high hazard, high risk work, I definitely want that person to be competent in that regard. So, Deb, once a worker has taken any of that prescribed training that we talked about earlier, what should take place when they return to the workplace and begin to implement what they've learned?
Yeah, good question. So you're going to want to make sure that workers understand the practices and the procedures that you have in place. And then after they take the training, I would suggest ask them some questions. Ask them questions on what did they learn? What did they learn that, maybe they didn't know before? Is there anything that they've learned to do something different than they were anticipating before they took the training? After you've had that discussion, I would suggest the next step would be to actually observe them completing the task that they've received training for. And this would be an important one because as the employer, as a supervisor, it allows you the opportunity to confirm that they understand the intent of how that practice or procedure was written. They understand the training, and then it also gives you a good opportunity to provide some coaching. Should things not be done exactly as you were expecting to be done, it's a good opportunity for you to step in as a supervisor and provide some coaching and direction, and then rewatch that process until you're confident that, yes, that worker does understand and is comfortable doing the task.
Okay. All right. So while we've covered all the questions that have essentially been topics that small construction companies or companies with less than 5 employees have asked us to cover, these two next questions are direct questions from small construction companies. So Dave, I'm going to give you the first one. Dave, this particular company asked, what is the very first health and safety training I should provide when hiring my first worker?
Well, Ken, the first training is that health and safety awareness training. Right? That's the one we need them to have. From there, we want to make sure that they have, if they're working at heights, they're going to have working at heights training, and as well as WMIS are probably the two top ones that we're going to have them have for training.
Gotcha. And so those are the prescribed training. What about anything like orientation, Dave?
Yeah. So orientation is huge. When do we have orientation? When would you want to have orientation? Well, I know when you come to IHSA, you're going to get orientation within the first day that you're showing up. You're going to meet with HR and they're going to go through an orientation and they're going to meet with me. But one of the things that we're going to look at with orientation is you're going to review the company's health and safety policy. So we're going to talk more about the policy in another episode. The policy is the management's commitment, the company's commitment to your health and safety. So you're going to explain that to them. You're going to review applicable legislations that your workers are going to apply. We talked a little bit about confined space. So if I'm a company going into work at confined spaces, I'm going to have to acquaint them with those regulations as well. When it comes to overviewing the company's program, and we'll talk more about a program and again in other episodes, but what are their roles and responsibilities that you expect from them? Another one that we're going to look at is safe work practices, safe job procedures that we expect them to follow, and they're going to be reviewing those. How to report unsafe acts or unsafe conditions. So if I'm a worker and I see something that's wrong, I know I have an obligation to report. How do I do it? Who do I report it to? So that's going to be part of your orientation. A big one is, what are the health and safety rules we expect you to follow, right? We're going to have certain basic rules that we're going to make sure that the workers know, so that they know that it's not acceptable for them to not follow those rules. Other ones are specific health and safety requirements when it comes to where you're working. So some of our companies will have people in the office, we'll have workers in a yard or in the shop, as well as on site. So you're going to have to tailor your orientation to be specific to those tasks that those workers are performing. One of the things that, and Deb spoke about it before, was how do we know that these workers got the information? So I know when you come to IHSA, if you're taking a course with us, you're going to have a knowledge evaluation. That's a written evaluation. Sometimes there's a hands-on evaluation. So you could do that with your workers as well. It could be a written evaluation, an oral evaluation. Or another way to look at it is, let's observe the worker doing that task to see if they're actually doing what we asked them to do.
Right.
One of the other things that we see with companies, and for these companies, small companies, they're going to get bigger. They're going to keep going year after year. Companies will have an annual orientation or an annual startup. Some of our companies will be shut down for a little bit, or they won't have as many workers. But at the beginning of each year, they'll bring in those workers again, and they'll have an orientation and go over the policies, procedures, rules, responsibilities again, just to give everybody that head start. Let's get this year going, and we'll be as safe as we can.
Okay. Deb, this one's for you. Are there free or low-cost occupational health and safety training options for small business in Ontario?
Absolutely. So being a member with IHSA comes with privileges. There are a number of free products and resources that we offer, or discounted, depending on the situation. But I would say for sure our Basics of Supervising program, which is a very important program for supervisors. It gives you all of the fundamental components that you need to really help you be successful. So that's available to you. Another one is the Basics of Health and Safety for Small Businesses. That one's a free one, which is online via e-learning. And then we offer some other programs as well. To name a few, there's our Hoisting and Rigging program, our Confined Space Awareness, Scaffolding Awareness, Trenching Hazard Awareness, are free programs that also members are able to take to gain that knowledge base. I will add on to this more on the product side though. On our website, there are a number of products that you can download. So we talked about work planning, you mentioned the training chart. There's a number of free resources for small businesses that can really support them as they're either first developing their program or expanding it.
Terrific. That's great. Thank you very much for all the information you shared. That was very, very helpful. And thank you for watching this episode of Ask a Construction Health and Safety Expert with Deb Moskal and Dave Dametto. IHSA is proud to support Ontario's construction industry, and we're proud to provide you with the tools and training your business needs to keep your workers healthy and safe and stay compliant. For more trusted resources and information, visit us at IHSA.ca.